when the old sheriff found an infant in a burned wagon at the edge of the desert. He never guessed that child would return 20 years later to kill him. But the truth about that night will change everything. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. Arizona Desert, 1867. Sheriff Thomas McCain reigned his bay gelding, eyes fixed on a column of black smoke rising against the copper sky. At 52 years old, with 20 years wearing a badge in red stone, he'd seen enough smoke to know the difference between a lightning strike and the devil's work. This smoke carried the stench of kerosene and death. The sun hung over the red rock formations like molten brass, burning away every shadow from the landscape. Heat waves danced across the hardpan, distorting the distant mesas into shimmering mirages. McCain wiped sweat from his weathered brow with a calloused hand and spurred his mount forward. His 6-shot Colt Peacemaker rested heavy on his right hip, a familiar weight that had become part of his body, like a 6-finger he'd learned to pull with deadly precision. When he crested the final rise, the carnage spread before him like a portrait of hell. 3 prairie schooners, or what remained of them, smoldered in a rough semicircle. Bodies lay scattered across the desert floor like broken dolls. The wagon's contents had been ransacked and strewn about, family photographs trampled into the dust, quilts torn and bloodied, children's toys abandoned in the chaos. These were settlers, hopeful families heading west with dreams of land and new beginnings. Now those dreams leaked into the thirsty sand. McCain dismounted slowly, his hand never leaving his revolver's grip. He'd fought Apaches, Mexican bandits, and Confederate irregulars during the war. He knew the signatures of violence. This wasn't Indian work. They would have taken the horses and anything of value, leaving the wagons intact. This was white men's evil. Deserters, probably, or one of the outlaw gangs that had multiplied like locusts since the war's end. Men without conscience or purpose beyond stealing and killing. He moved among the bodies with grim efficiency, checking each for signs of life, though he knew it was futile. The men had been shot in the back or head, execution style. The women bore signs of violation before death. And the children. McCain clenched his jaw, forcing himself to look away from a small girl no older than 6, her skull crushed by a rifle butt. 20 years of law work should have hardened him to such sights, but some things never stopped cutting deep. The keening wail reached his ears just as he was preparing to dig graves. Faint, almost swallowed by the wind whistling through the rocks, but unmistakable, an infant's cry. McCain's head snapped toward the sound. It came from beneath an overturned wagon, where a wicker basket lay miraculously protected by the wagon's frame. Inside, swaddled in a bloodstained blanket, lay a baby boy. 3 months old, McCain guessed, with a face reddened by heat and crying. The child's dark eyes locked onto McCain's weathered face, and for a moment the crying ceased. Those eyes held something ancient, something knowing. The look that newborns sometimes have, as if they remember truths the rest of us have forgotten. McCain lifted the basket carefully, his rough hands gentler than they'd been in years. Near the wagon lay the child's mother, a young woman perhaps 25, with 2 bullet holes in her chest. Her arms were extended toward the basket, fingers frozen in a final desperate reach. She died trying to protect her baby. On her left hand, a simple gold wedding band caught the harsh sunlight. The sheriff removed his hat and stood in silence for a full minute, head bowed. Then he closed the woman's eyes with careful fingers and turned his attention to the infant. Around the baby's neck hung a leather medallion on a thin cord. McCain opened the locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of a man and woman, young and hopeful. On the reverse side, a name was engraved in careful script: Elijah Kane. "Elijah," McCain said aloud, testing the name. "All right, little man, let's get you out of this hell." The grave digging took hours under the merciless sun. The ground was hard as iron, each shovel thrust sending jolts of pain through McCain's back and shoulders. Sweat soaked his shirt, turning the faded blue fabric dark. But he was old-school frontier law. Even the dead deserved dignity. He buried each body properly, building cairns of rock over the graves so coyotes and vultures couldn't desecrate them. Over the graves, he erected a rough wooden cross, carving into it with his knife, "Unknown travelers, may the Lord grant them peace." 1867. The baby began crying again, hungry, frightened, alone in ways no infant should be. McCain had no idea how to care for a child. His wife Martha had died of fever 7 years back, and they'd never been blessed with children. But he poured water from his canteen onto a clean handkerchief and let the baby suck on it. Elijah quieted, tiny fingers wrapping around McCain's calloused thumb with surprising strength. McCain secured the basket to his saddle and began the long ride back to Redstone. The sun was descending toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Shadows lengthened across the desert floor like dark fingers reaching across the land. As he rode, McCain couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Multiple times he turned in the saddle, scanning the rock formations and sparse juniper scrub, but saw nothing except heat shimmer and shadow. Maybe it was the men who'd done this, watching to ensure no witnesses survived. Maybe it was his imagination, sharpened by too many years of danger. Either way, they'd missed one, the smallest one. When darkness fell, McCain made camp beside a seasonal creek that still held a trickle of water. He built a small fire and sat with his back against a boulder, the baby cradled in his arms. He hummed an old Irish lullaby his mother had sung to him half a century ago, in a different world across an ocean. Elijah's eyes slowly closed, his tiny face relaxing into the trust only infants can give. "I'll take care of you, son," McCain whispered into the firelight. "I promise. You'll grow up honest, not like the bastards who killed your folks." The words felt like a vow, sacred and binding. He didn't know then that this promise would eventually shatter his heart. Didn't know that blood has its own trajectory, its own demands. Didn't know that some secrets refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep you dig. As the fire burned down to embers, McCain remained awake, listening to the desert night, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of lizards in the brush, the whisper of wind through stone, and somewhere out there in the darkness, the soft clop of hoofbeats slowly fading into the distance. Someone had been watching, and now they knew about the baby. Redstone, Arizona Territory, 1887. The town had grown in 2 decades. New buildings lined the main street. Telegraph wires connected them to the wider world, and a spur line of the Southern Pacific Railroad had transformed the isolated outpost into a genuine settlement. But beneath the veneer of civilization, Redstone remained what it had always been, a hard place for hard men, where disputes were still settled with fists and firearms. Thomas McCain sat in his sheriff's office, boots propped on his scarred oak desk, a position of repose that had become habitual over the years. He was 70 now, his hair gone completely white, his face carved into deep lines like a canyon wall weathered by wind and time. But his eyes remained sharp as ever, and his gun hand steady. The tarnished silver star on his vest had been polished so many times over the decades that the engraving was nearly worn smooth. Through the open window drifted the familiar sounds of town life, the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the rattle of freight wagons on the rutted street, the tinny music of a mechanical piano from the Lucky Jack saloon. McCain closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him. Lately, he'd been thinking about death more often, about what a man leaves behind when he crosses that final river. His legacy would be 20 years of law enforcement, a few dozen outlaws hanged or imprisoned, and countless small acts of justice and mercy that nobody would remember. And Elijah, most of all Elijah, the boy, now a man of 23, had grown tall and lean, with dark hair and gray eyes that could turn cold as January frost. McCain had raised him as his own son, teaching him to ride before he could properly walk, to shoot by age 10, to track game and read sign by 12. Elijah had attended the schoolhouse run by Widow Parker, where he'd learned reading, writing, and arithmetic. He'd read McCain's collection of books, discussed politics and philosophy, and dreamed of seeing the world beyond Arizona's desert horizons. But between them always lay the shadow of an unspoken truth. McCain had never told Elijah the full story of how he'd found him. He'd said only that the boy's parents had died of fever when he was an infant, and that McCain had taken him in out of Christian duty. A simple lie, told from love, meant to protect a child from nightmares. But lies, even well-intentioned ones, have a way of festering like infected wounds. The door to the office burst open without warning, and Elijah strode in. He was dressed in black shirt, black vest, black hat, with 2 ivory-handled Colts riding low on his hips and tied-down holsters. The guns were unusual for a town dweller, but Elijah had never been usual. There was something coiled about him, dangerous, like a rattlesnake sunning itself on a rock. "Old man," Elijah said, his voice flat and controlled, but with an undercurrent of tension that made McCain's instincts flare. "We need to talk." McCain swung his boots off the desk and sat up straight. "Thought you were helping McGregor with his cattle roundup today." "Finished early," Elijah replied, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. He approached the desk slowly, and McCain noticed he carried something wrapped in faded cloth. "Found something yesterday while looking for property deeds for Thompson. Your safe was open." McCain's blood ran cold. Elijah unwrapped the cloth, revealing an old leather medallion, the very one McCain had removed from the baby's neck 20 years ago and locked away, thinking it would remain hidden forever. "Found this," Elijah said quietly, his voice carrying the calm before a thunderstorm. "Inside there's a photograph, and a name, my real name." He opened the medallion, displaying the miniature portrait. "Elijah Kane, not Elijah McCain, like you've told me my entire life. Kane." McCain rose slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Elijah, listen to me." 20 years, Elijah interrupted, his voice rising. 20 years, and you never thought the time was right to tell me the truth." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Who are these people in the photograph? My real parents? The ones who supposedly died of fever?" The pain and betrayal in Elijah's voice cut McCain deeper than any knife wound. McCain let his hands drop, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. "Sit down, son. I'll tell you everything. The whole truth." "I'll stand," Elijah said coldly, planting his feet wide, his hands now resting near his gun butts. Not quite a threat, but not entirely innocent either. McCain nodded, his gaze drifting to the window and the town beyond, the town he'd served and protected for most of his adult life. "I found you in the desert," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. 3 wagons of settlers had been attacked, burned. Everyone was killed, men, women, children. Everyone except you. You were in a basket, and your mother, she died reaching for you, trying to save you with her last breath. Silence filled the room like water flooding a mine shaft. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second an eternity. "Killed," Elijah repeated finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "By whom?" "I don't know," McCain admitted. "I searched for years, followed every rumor, questioned every drifter and outlaw I could find, but the trail went cold. The men who did it vanished like smoke." That was mostly true. McCain had searched, though perhaps not as hard as he could have. But how could he explain the complications? The reasons why some trails are better left to grow over? "You're a liar," Elijah said, and the word hung in the air like gun smoke. "My entire life has been a lie. I was protecting you." McCain's voice cracked. "You were a baby. What was I supposed to do? Tell a child his parents were butchered? That he survived only by blind luck? You should have told me the truth when I was old enough to handle it," Elijah shot back. "Instead, you stole my identity, stole my past." He moved toward the door, his decision clearly made. "Where are you going?" McCain asked, though he already knew the answer. "To find them, the men who did this." Elijah's hand was on the doorknob. "It's been 20 years, Elijah. They could be dead, could be anywhere in the territories." "Then I'll go anywhere necessary," Elijah replied. He paused, turning back. "There was someone else there, wasn't there?" A witness. McCain hesitated, then nodded slowly. Old Joe, a wanderer. He passed through the next morning, saw tracks, said there were 4 riders, all heading north toward the Black Hills. But Joe died 5 years back, drank himself to death. So I start at the Black Hills, Elijah said, as if plotting coordinates on a map. Elijah, don't do this. Revenge won't bring you peace. It'll only eat you alive from the inside. What would bring me peace? Continuing to live a lie. Elijah's laugh was bitter, empty of humor. You raised me, old man. You taught me that evil must be punished, that justice matters above everything else. Now I'm just following what you taught me. He walked out, closing the door with a quiet click that sounded like a coffin lid shutting. McCain collapsed into his chair, his face in his hands. He knew he'd lost his son in that moment. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. The bond between them had snapped as surely as an overstressed rope. That night, McCain couldn't sleep. He sat on his porch, staring up at the indifferent stars. The same stars that had watched over the desert massacre 2 decades ago. Somewhere a coyote howled. Somewhere someone laughed in the saloon. And in his room, Elijah packed his saddlebags with clothes, ammunition, dried food, and a revolver McCain had given him for his 18th birthday, engraved with the initials EM. Wrong initials, wrong name, wrong life. Tomorrow at dawn, Elijah would ride out, and McCain knew, with the terrible certainty that comes from a lifetime of reading men and situations, that when Elijah returned, if he returned, nothing would ever be the same. Black Hills, Dakota Territory. The journey north took Elijah 3 weeks of hard riding through desert, mountain passes, and prairie. In every dusty town and whiskey-soaked saloon, he asked the same questions. Did anyone remember a gang that murdered settlers 20 years ago? For riders who left trails of blood across the frontier? Most people shook their heads or laughed in his face. 20 years was an eternity in West, where yesterday's villains became today's corpses or tomorrow's legends. Men died, gangs dissolved, memories faded like tracks in wind-blown sand. But Elijah persisted, his jaw set with the kind of determination that made smart men step aside and fools reconsider their courage. The Black Hills greeted him with rain, a cold, relentless downpour that turned the roads into rivers of mud and forced him to seek shelter in a settlement with the grimly appropriate name of Dead Man's Gulch. The town was typical of gold rush camps. One crooked street lined with ramshackle buildings, a saloon, a flophouse hotel, a general store, and a blacksmith. Everything built fast and temporary, as if the inhabitants knew they'd be moving on soon, chasing the next strike, the next dream. Elijah tied his horse to the hitching post outside the Golden Fever Saloon and pushed through the batwing doors, shaking rain from his hat. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke, body odor, and the sour smell of spilled whiskey. A fat bartender in a grease-stained apron stood behind the bar. Several miners sat at tables playing cards. In the corner, a lone piano player pounded out a dirge on an out-of-tune upright. Elijah approached the bar. Whiskey and information. The bartender poured a glass of murky liquid. Information costs more than whiskey. Elijah placed a silver dollar on the scarred wood. I'm looking for 4 men. They worked these territories 20 years ago. Attacked settler wagons. The bartender glanced at the coin, then at Elijah's face. A lot of gangs operated back then. What makes yours special? They murdered my parents, Elijah said flatly. The piano music stopped abruptly. Every head in the saloon turned toward the stranger at the bar. Even a lawless place like Dead Man's Gulch, there were lines, and revenge for murdered parents was a motive every man understood. The bartender slowly wiped his hands on his apron. That's a dangerous road, boy. Revenge has a way of ending in unmarked graves. Not your concern. Do you know anything or not? Elijah's tone brooked no deflection. The bartender exchanged a significant glance with an old prospector in the corner, a grizzled man with a gray beard and a patch over his left eye. The prospector gave an almost imperceptible nod. There was one, the bartender finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Name of Caleb Drake. He ran a gang back in those days. They said he killed for pleasure, not just profit. But he hung 10 years ago for a stagecoach robbery. Elijah felt something collapse in his chest. 10 years ago. Dead. What about the others? His men. 2 died with him on the gallows. But there was a 4th. Fellow named Scarlet. Red-haired bastard with a scar across his whole face. He escaped when they rounded up the gang. Nobody knows where he went. What's he look like? The one-eyed prospector stood and shuffled to the bar. Tall, skinny as a fence post. Got a scar from forehead to chin. Runs right through his left eye. That eye's blind, white as milk. I seen him once. Once was enough. He spat into a brass spittoon. But if you're smart, boy, you'll forget about him. Scarlet ain't human. He's a demon wearing skin. Elijah downed his whiskey in one swallow, feeling it burn down his throat. Where can I find him? The prospector shook his head sadly. Heard rumors he's down south, near the Mexican border. Town called Snake Shadow. Trades guns with smugglers and revolutionaries. Elijah nodded, placed another $1 on the bar, and turned toward the door. Hey, boy, the bartender called after him. What name should I carve on your cross? Elijah looked back over his shoulder, a cold smile touching his lips. Elijah Kane, but you won't need to. He stepped back into the rain, which had intensified into a torrential storm. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the squalid town in stark, brilliant white. Thunder rolled across the hills like distant artillery. Elijah mounted his horse and turned it south. Snake Shadow. 2 more weeks of riding. But now he had a name, Scarlet. He rode through the night, ignoring the rain and exhaustion. Images cycled through his mind. A mother he'd never known, reaching desperately toward his basket. A father whose face he'd seen only in a miniature portrait. McCain, the lying old man who'd stolen his real life. And Scarlet, a red-haired demon with a dead white eye. On the 3rd day of southward travel, Elijah stopped in a narrow canyon to rest his horse. He built a small fire and was chewing on jerky when he heard the sound of approaching hooves. 3 riders emerged from around a bend, dusty, heavily armed, with the look of men who lived outside the law. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a pockmarked face, grinned unpleasantly. Well, look here. Lone traveler. Nice horse. Nice guns. The bandit dismounted, his 2 companions following suit. They formed a semicircle, clearly intending to rob and probably kill. Hand over the horse, the guns, and whatever you got in your pockets. Maybe you walk away alive. Elijah rose slowly, his hands hanging loose at his sides. Ride past. I'm not looking for trouble. But trouble found you, the leader said, reaching for his revolver. He never cleared leather. Elijah's hands became a blur, both Colts appearing as if by magic. 3 shots, so close together they sounded almost like one. The leader dropped with a hole between his eyes. The nervous bandit to the left grabbed his throat as blood spurted between his fingers. The 3rd man fell to his knees, staring in disbelief at the spreading red stain on his shirt. 5 seconds. It was over in 5 seconds. Elijah reloaded methodically, looking at the bodies without emotion. He felt no remorse, no triumph, only emptiness, cold and absolute. This was his first real gunfight, but McCain had taught him well. Very well indeed. He left the bodies for the vultures and continued south toward Snake Shadow, toward answers, toward a red-haired demon, and toward a truth that would prove far more terrible than any he'd imagined. Snake Shadow was a festering wound on the edge of civilization, a collection of adobe shacks, gambling dens, and brothels clinging to existence in the brutal heat where Arizona met Mexico. Even by frontier standards, it was exceptionally vile, a place where the law existed only in the form of the fastest gun and the sharpest knife. Elijah arrived at sunset, when the sun painted the dust-choked sky in shades of rust and dried blood. He left his horse at the livery, warning the proprietor, a skeletal Mexican missing his front teeth, that if anything happened to the animal, the consequences would be fatal. The man nodded nervously, recognizing the look of a killer in Elijah's cold gray eyes. He started a search at a cantina called El Diablo Rojo, a filthy establishment that served rocket mezcal and asked few questions. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of spilled tequila, unwashed bodies, and the underlying copper scent of old violence. Smoke from hand-rolled cigarettes hung in layers, making visibility poor and breathing difficult. Elijah ordered a drink and addressed the bartender, a massive Mexican with a scar bisecting his right cheek like a railroad track. Looking for a man. Goes by Scarlet. Red hair, scar across his face. The bartender stopped wiping the glass in his hand, his eyes narrowing to suspicious slits. Poor K. I have business with him. Bad business, I think. The bartender shook his head slowly. Scarlet is a very bad man, senor. Very bad. He will kill you for your boots. Where is he? The bartender hesitated, clearly weighing the risks of involvement against whatever loyalty or fear he felt toward Scarlet. Finally, he sighed heavily. There's an old rancho. East of town, maybe 2 miles. He meets his buyers there, guns, ammunition, things that cross borders in the dark. But I did not tell you this, comprehend? Elijah placed a silver coin on the bar. You told me nothing. The rancho was a half-collapsed hacienda, surrounded by saguaro cacti and broken dreams. Once it had been a working cattle operation, but now it served only as a haven for criminals and contraband. Elijah approached after full darkness, moving with the silence of a hunting cat, his boots making no sound on the hard-packed earth. Through a grimy window, he observed 3 men sitting around a rough-hewn table lit by a single kerosene lamp. 2 were Mexicans in wide sombreros, their bandoliers crossed over their chests like the revolutionaries they probably were. The 3rd man was tall and gaunt, with a shock of red hair that seemed to glow in the lamplight. A scar ran from his hairline to his chin, a grotesque canyon of twisted flesh that bisected his face. His left eye was milky white, blind and dead. Scarlet. Elijah felt his pulse hammer in his temples. This was one of them. One of the men who had murdered his parents, who had left him an orphan in the desert to die. Every muscle in his body screamed to burst through the door shooting, to end this monster's life in a hail of lead and fury. But he needed answers first. He needed to know why. He needed to understand what kind of evil murders entire families for money or sport. He waited with the patience of a snake coiled beneath a rock, watching as the Mexicans completed their transaction, counting money, inspecting crates of rifles, nodding in satisfaction. When they finally departed, loading their wagon with contraband and disappearing into the night, Scarlet remained alone, counting his blood money by lamplight. Elijah entered through the back door, both Colts drawn, and aimed at the red-haired killer's head. The old wood didn't creak. He tested the hinges first, moving the door a fraction of an inch at a time until he stood inside, a ghost made flesh. Scarlet turned slowly, his good eye widening fractionally before his hand darted toward the revolver on the table. But he froze when he saw the 2 gun barrels pointed at his skull, steady as iron beams. "Don't move," Elijah said, his voice calm as a judge pronouncing sentence. Scarlet slowly raised his hands, a predatory smile twisting his ruined face. "Well now, who might you be, boy? Bounty hunter? I don't have paper on me anymore. Paid off the right people. I'm not a bounty hunter." Elijah stepped closer, keeping both guns trained on center mass. "You don't remember me, but you killed my parents. 20 years ago. 3 wagons in the Arizona desert." The smile on Scarlet's face widened, showing yellowed teeth. 3 wagons. "Son, I've killed so many people I couldn't count them if I had all year. You'll have to be more specific than that." Elijah felt rage boiling in his chest like acid. "Families, women, children. You and your gang burned them alive." "Ah, that job." Scarlet nodded as if recalling a pleasant memory. "That was Caleb's operation. I was just helping out. Good times, good money." He tilted his head, studying Elijah with his one working eye. "So you're one of those brats? How'd you survive? Doesn't matter. What matters is you're going to answer for what you did." Scarlet laughed, a sound like gravel sliding down a tin roof. "Justice. Out here, you're young and stupid, boy. There ain't no justice on the frontier. Only power. And right now, I got friends nearby who heard you come in." He was lying. Elijah could tell from the slight shift in his eye, the tension in his shoulders. But the distraction attempt gave Scarlett the opening he needed. With shocking speed for a man his age, he kicked the table hard, sending it flying toward Elijah while simultaneously diving for the gun on its surface. Elijah fired, but the bullet went wide by inches as the table crashed into his legs. Scarlett came up with his revolver, firing blindly. The shot whined past Elijah's head, close enough to feel the hot breath of its passage. They exchanged fire in the confined space, muzzle flashes strobing like lightning, the concussive roar of gunshots deafening. Scarlett was good, better than the road agents Elijah had killed. He moved like a scorpion, fast and lethal, using furniture as cover, firing from unexpected angles. But Elijah was better. McCain had trained him with obsessive thoroughness, drilling him hour after hour until drawing and firing became as natural as breathing. His bullet caught Scarlett in the right thigh, spinning him around and dropping him to the floor with a scream of pain and rage. The killer's gun clattered away across the warped floorboards. Elijah kicked it further, then pressed the barrel of his Colt against Scarlett's forehead, right between the eyes. One dead white, one burning with hatred. "Last words?" Elijah asked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Scarlett coughed, blood flecking his lips. His laugh was wet and bubbling. "You think this is the end? You don't know nothing, boy. That sheriff who raised you, your precious father figure, he was part of it all along." Elijah's hand trembled. "What? McCain?" Scarlett's smile was triumphant despite his wound. "He was in on the whole thing. We had orders from someone big, someone who wanted those settlers dead. McCain fed us information. When the wagons left, what routes they took, how many guns they had. Then he covered it up afterward, made sure no investigation got too close." The dying man's eye glittered with malice. "Your whole life is built on lies, boy. Your hero is a murderer, just like us. You're lying. Kill me, and you'll never know for sure." Scarlett coughed again, more blood. "Search my coat. Inside pocket. There's letters. Read them and see who your daddy really is." Elijah's mind reeled. Every instinct screamed that this was a final manipulation, a last attempt to sow chaos and pain. But doubt had already planted its poisonous seed. He kept the gun pressed to Scarlett's skull while reaching into the man's coat with his free hand. His fingers found a leather wallet, worn and cracked with age. Inside were several folded papers, yellowed and fragile. He pulled one out, unfolded it with shaking fingers. The handwriting was familiar, achingly, impossibly familiar. "Caleb, job tomorrow at dawn. 3 wagons. No witnesses. Standard payment. TM. TM Thomas McCain." The world seemed to tilt beneath Elijah's feet. His vision blurred, whether from rage or tears he couldn't say. The letter could be forged, but the handwriting. He'd seen that handwriting on wanted posters, on official documents, on birthday notes McCain had written him as a child. "See," Scarlett whispered, his voice weakening. "You've been living with your parents' killer all along. How's that for justice?" Elijah pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the small room. Scarlett's head snapped back, and his one good eye went glassy and fixed. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the floor in a dark mirror. But there was no satisfaction in it, no closure, only a hollow emptiness and a question that burned like a brand. Had McCain really been part of the massacre? Elijah searched the rest of the wallet with numb fingers, finding 2 more letters in the same handwriting, with similar coded messages about timing and targets. He folded them carefully and placed them in his own pocket, evidence of a betrayal too monstrous to comprehend. He stood over Scarlett's corpse for a long moment, the gun still smoking in his hand. One of his parents' killers was dead, but the victory tasted like ashes and gall. Because if Scarlett had told the truth, then the man who'd raised him, the man he called father for 20 years, was the architect of his entire tragedy. Elijah walked out into the night, leaving the body behind. The desert stretched endlessly under a sky full of indifferent stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a sound of loneliness and loss that echoed the howling in Elijah's soul. He had to go back to Redstone, back to McCain, back to the truth, whatever it might cost him. The ride back to Redstone took 2 weeks, but it felt like 2 lifetimes. Elijah barely slept, barely ate, his mind consumed by the letters in his pocket and the impossible questions they raised. Had McCain really betrayed those settlers? Had he orchestrated the deaths of Elijah's parents, then taken the orphaned baby as some twisted form of penance? Or was this Scarlett's final revenge, a lie designed to poison everything Elijah believed, to turn him into a patricide, haunted by guilt for the rest of his days? The uncertainty was worse than any physical torture. Elijah's thoughts ran in circles like a caged wolf, finding no escape, no resolution. He imagined confronting McCain, imagined the old man's face when presented with the evidence, imagined pulling the trigger and ending the life of the only father he'd ever known. But could he do it? Could he kill the man who'd taught him to read, who'd bandaged his scraped knees, who'd sat up with him through fever-racked nights when he was a child? The man who'd given him a name, a home, a future? The desert offered no answers, only heat, thirst, and the endless horizon. When Elijah finally rode into Redstone on a dusty afternoon, the town looked smaller than he remembered, more worn and tired. Or perhaps that was just his own exhaustion reflecting back at him from the weathered buildings. People stared as he passed. The prodigal son returned, looking haggard and dangerous. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and stood for a moment, hand on the door handle, gathering what remained of his courage. Then he pushed inside without knocking. McCain sat behind his desk exactly as Elijah had left him, as if the old man hadn't moved in all the weeks since. But he looked older, more fragile, as if he'd aged a decade in a month. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. When he saw Elijah, something like hope flickered in those tired eyes. "Elijah, thank God you're back. I was worried." "Shut up." Elijah's voice was cold as a tomb. He closed the door behind him and locked it. McCain's expression shifted to wariness, then fear as he saw what Elijah carried in his hand. Not a gun, but papers. "What happened?" "I found Scarlett. I killed him." Elijah's words were clipped, emotionless. But before he died, he told me something interesting. Want to guess what it was? McCain's face went pale. "Elijah, he said you were part of it." Elijah slammed the letters down on the desk. "Said you fed information to the gang. Told them when the wagons would leave, what routes they'd take. Said you were paid to betray those settlers to their deaths." McCain stared at the letters as if they were rattlesnakes coiled on his desk. His hands trembled. "Where did you get those?" "Scarlett carried them. Your handwriting, old man. Your words." Elijah's hand moved to his gun. "Explain. And if you lie to me again, I swear to God I'll put a bullet in your brain right here." For a long moment, McCain said nothing. Then, slowly, he stood, his movements those of a man carrying an unbearable weight. He walked to the window, staring out at the town he'd protected for 20 years. "It's true," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I was corrupt. 20 years ago, a wealthy landowner wanted certain settlers eliminated, families who had legal claims to land he wanted for himself. He paid me to provide information to Caleb Drake's gang. I told myself I wasn't killing anyone, just passing along details. But that was a lie. I knew what Drake would do with that information." Elijah felt the floor drop away beneath him. Some part of him had desperately hoped for a denial, for proof that Scarlett had lied. But here it was, a confession from McCain's own lips. "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you do that?" McCain turned, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Money. My wife was dying, and the doctors cost everything I had. I needed funds for medicine, for care. I convinced myself it was justified, that I was doing it for love, for Martha. But she died anyway, and I was left with blood on my hands and a soul blackened by sin. And then you found me." Elijah's voice was hollow. "Yes, when I rode out to that massacre and saw what my information had caused, the children, the mothers, the senseless slaughter, I realized I'd become a monster, Worse than the outlaws I'd sworn to hunt. McCain's voice broke. And then I found you. Alive. Crying. And I thought if I could save you, raise you right, maybe I could atone for what I'd done. Maybe I could balance the scales, just a little. Atonement. Elijah laughed bitterly. You thought you could atone for murdering my parents by raising me on lies. I loved you like my own son. That was never a lie. You didn't have the right. Elijah roared, drawing his revolver and pointing it at McCain's chest. You killed my family and stole my life. McCain made no move to defend himself. He stood calmly, accepting whatever judgment was coming. You're right. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Don't deserve to live. If you need to kill me to find peace, then do it. I won't fight you. Elijah's hand shook, the gun wavering. Every fiber of his being screamed for vengeance, for the satisfaction of watching McCain fall as his parents had fallen. It would be so easy. Just squeeze the trigger, and the old man's life closed this chapter in blood. But his finger wouldn't move, because despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the unforgivable sins, part of him still loved the old man. Part of him still saw the father who taught him to ride, who'd read him stories at bedtime, who'd been there for every scraped knee and childhood fear. With a cry of anguish, Elijah lowered the gun. I can't, he whispered. God help me, I can't do it. McCain exhaled shakily, relief and sorrow warring on his face. Elijah, don't. Elijah held up a hand. Don't say anything. You're dead to me now. Do you understand? Dead. I'm leaving Redstone, and I never want to see you again. He turned toward the door, holstering his weapon with numb fingers. Where will you go? McCain asked softly. Anywhere you're not. Elijah unlocked the door and pulled it open. Live with what you've done, old man. Live with it until it kills you. He walked out into the afternoon sun, leaving McCain standing alone in the office that had been his kingdom for 2 decades. The old sheriff sank into his chair, buried his face in his hands, and wept like a child. For the man he'd been, for the boy he'd wronged, and for the future they'd both lost. 1 year passed. Elijah drifted across the territories like a ghost, working as a bounty hunter and hired gun. He developed a reputation for being fast, efficient, and utterly without mercy. Men whispered his name in saloons, warning others not to cross him. He killed many, outlaws mostly, men with prices on their heads, but each time he pulled the trigger, he saw McCain's face. The rage that had sustained him began to hollow out, leaving only emptiness. Revenge had proven meaningless. Justice felt like a child's fairy tale, and forgiveness seemed impossible for either the living or the dead. The telegram reached him in a town called Silver Creek, delivered to his hotel by a nervous clerk. McCain dying. Asks for you. Come quickly. Dr. Stevens. Elijah could have ignored it, could have continued his aimless wandering, living as a ghost among the living. But something drew him back. Unfinished business, unanswered questions, perhaps a last chance at closure. He arrived in Redstone 2 days later. The town looked shabbier than ever, as if it had aged in sympathy with its dying sheriff. Dr. Stevens met him at McCain's house, a small wooden structure on the town's edge. It's his heart, the doctor explained quietly. Could be hours, could be days, but not long. Elijah nodded and entered the dim interior. The smell of sickness permeated everything, the peculiar odor of a body shutting down. McCain lay in bed, his frame so withered he barely made an impression beneath the blankets. His face was gray as ash, but when he saw Elijah, his eyes brightened with desperate hope. Son, he whispered. Elijah sat in the chair beside the bed, saying nothing. They remained in silence for a long moment, the ticking of a clock marking time's relentless march. Thank you for coming, McCain said finally, each word clearly costing him effort. Didn't expect you would. Why did you want to see me? McCain's trembling hand reached toward the bedside table, where a thick envelope lay. Need to give you something. Truth. All of it. Elijah took the envelope and opened it. Inside were legal documents, property deeds, bank statements, and a lengthy handwritten letter. As he read, The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The wealthy landowner who'd paid for the massacre was named Cordell Hastings, a railroad baron who'd wanted the land for a rail spur. After Martha's death, McCain had been consumed by guilt. He'd spent 20 years investigating Hastings, gathering evidence of corruption, bribery, and murder. The envelope contained everything needed to destroy Hastings and bring him to justice. I couldn't bring back your parents, McCain whispered, but I could make sure their killer paid. I've been working on this for 20 years, waiting until I had enough to hang him. Elijah stared at the documents, emotions churning. Why didn't you do it yourself? Because I deserved to hang beside him, but I couldn't leave you without knowing, without giving you the choice. McCain's breathing became more labored. This is yours now. You decide. Justice or mercy. Revenge or forgiveness. Whatever you choose. I accept. I should hate you, Elijah said, his voice thick with unshed tears. Part of me does. You helped murder my parents. You stole my past. I know, but you also raised me, gave me a future, loved me when you didn't have to. Elijah wiped his eyes roughly. I don't know how to reconcile those two truths. McCain smiled sadly. You don't have to. Life isn't that simple. People aren't all good or all evil. We're just broken things trying to do better than we did yesterday. Did you do better? I tried. God knows. I tried. McCain's eyes closed. Used your father's money. The landowner paid me 30 pieces of silver. I've spent it all building schools, funding orphanages, helping widows. Tried to balance scales that can never be balanced. Elijah looked at the frail old man in the bed, the monster who'd betrayed his parents, the father who'd raised him with love, the lawman who'd spent 2 decades seeking atonement. All these contradictions existing in one failing body. I forgive you, Elijah said suddenly, surprising himself with the words. McCain's eyes opened, wet with tears. You shouldn't. Maybe not. But holding on to hatred is killing me slower than a bullet would. And maybe you did the best you could with the mess you made. Elijah took McCain's hand, cold, fragile as bird bones. You were a terrible man who tried to become good. That has to count for something. Thank you, McCain breathed. Thank you, son. They sat together as the afternoon light faded to evening. Then to night, Dr. Stevens came and went quietly. Elijah held McCain's hand and told him stories, memories of childhood, of lessons learned, of moments that had shaped him into the man he'd become. Just before midnight, McCain's breathing changed, becoming shallow and irregular. His eyes found Elijah's one last time. I'm proud of you, he whispered. So proud. Tell me, what will you do with Hastings? Elijah looked at the envelope on the table, at the evidence that could hang a powerful man. I'll take it to the federal marshal. Let the law handle it. That's what you taught me, justice, not revenge. McCain smiled. Good. That's good. His grip tightened fractionally on Elijah's hand. I'm sorry for everything, but I never regretted finding you. You were my redemption. And you were my father, Elijah said, accepting the truth of it at last. The only one I knew. That matters more than blood. McCain's eyes closed. His breathing slowed, stopped, resumed one final time. Then nothing. Just stillness and the quiet ticking of the clock. Elijah sat with the body until dawn, holding the hand of the complicated man who'd given him life twice. Once by finding him in the desert. Once by teaching him how to live with honor despite a dishonorable past. When morning came, he stood, placed McCain's hand gently on his chest, and picked up the envelope. He had work to do. Cordell Hastings would face justice, and Elijah would finally step out of the shadows of the past and into whatever future he could build. As he walked out of the house, the rising sun painted red stone in shades of gold. It was a new day, and for the first time in his life, Elijah Kane faced it not with rage or emptiness, but with something approaching peace. The dead could finally rest, and so, perhaps, could the living. See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you.